Hello, listeners. My name is Cliff Ratza. I'm the author of two ongoing series of novels, the Lightning Brain series and its sequel, the Keeper series. I also serve as a writing coach for Prime Solutions, teach at universities, and have a consulting business. So if you would like to learn more about me, my books, or my writing coach activities, or make comments or suggestions, please visit the lightningbrainseries.com website. Now, the title of this podcast is The Big Data Explosion. Can we avoid becoming collateral damage? We are now at the beginning of the AI-empowered big data information age that impacts the 6 environments we inhabit. And those environments are the physical world, which climate change calls attention to, health, which COVID-19 puts front and center, social, consider all the trials being reported by the media, technological, think computer and DNA developments, political, just consider all the Washington bickering, and economic, think about the work at home and supply chain disruptions. All this and more should make listeners want to hear what I have to say about the big data explosion, which is part of the title of Michael Chertoff's recent nonfiction book. I'll talk about his book in a couple of minutes, and I've already given examples of big data's impact on the 6 environments. But first, I will give a summary of a review I found online of Kim Stanley Robinson's book, and I'll show that book to you. I might as well show it to you right now. Here it is. Rather a thick book, wouldn't you say? Well, comment on that later. So, writers and authors will especially like hearing this podcast because I'm going to go over the review, and the reviewer says a lot that gives helpful guidelines for how reviewers evaluate and rate books. So here's a summary book review. Robinson, a respected sci-fi writer, balances hard scientific and political facts that exists right now with his fanciful sci-fi futuristic projections that lead to an optimistic outcome for the global warming issues the world faces throughout the next 40 years. The international community establishes in 2019 a ministry for the future, whose charter puts teeth into International Panel on Climate Change recommendations for weaning the world off fossil fuels and into renewals. Here are a couple of the solutions: glacier rejuvenation and polar terraforming to stop the polar ice caps from melting, seeding the atmosphere with sulfur dioxide, which can cause Mount Pinatubo eruption-like atmospheric cooling. The author blends current science, adds some Star Trek, stirs in a pinch of political reality, and throws in characters Frank, Mary, and Art, whose personal and political relationships in the socio-political world have subplots that left-leaning and right-leaning readers will like. The plot spans 4 decades worth of experience for the 3 major characters, Frank, Mary, and Art, that highlight the path the world takes to an optimistic, socialistic-leaning future. America stumbles with global warming, but China and India do not, and the world starts tipping more towards socialism than democracy, but in a complementary rather than confrontational manner. The Ministry of the Future gets big business, big data, social media companies, and big government to do the right thing by getting Wall Street, SPACs, and SPACs are special acquisition companies, and governments to put money where it will do the most good for curbing global warming. Carbon tax credits play an important role. And for writers and authors in particular, here are the points the reviewer makes regarding the actual writing. The book is long, 563 pages. I've already shown you the book. But the chapters are short. There are 106 of them. And that relieves some of the effort caused from reading all those pages. The book jumps around in time and location and narrator point of view, and point of view is abbreviated POV, and it has a lot of backstory that's disconnected from the narration and dialogue. And the dialogue seems stilted, like the characters are delivering moral lessons. The author doesn't use standard double quotation marks to mark dialogue. Instead, he uses too many adverbs and awkward dialogue tags. The reviewer also says that he found too many stylistic errors to justify the 5-star Goodreads rating he gave the book. He would have given it 4 stars if he'd been completely honest. But he applauded the book's content and optimistic outlook as the ministry for the future gets the nations of the world to stop global warming by working together. So now let's turn to Michael Chertoff. He was the co-author of the U.S. Patriot Act and previously served as a United States Circuit Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, as a federal prosecutor, and as Assistant U.S. Attorney General. He succeeded Tom Ridge as the United States Secretary of Homeland Security in 2005. He certainly has the background for writing the nonfiction book, Exploding Data, Reclaiming Our Cybersecurity in the Digital Age. I'm going to show you the book. It's 207 clearly written pages giving the facts and then his conclusions. And it starts by presenting a concise summary of the internet and how it changed into big data. Technology has always played a major role communicating data to people. Think of the printing press, telegraphy, and then the telephone. And then came the 20th century computer revolution and its zeros and ones that our government's ARPA, that's Advanced Research Projects Agency, and DARPA stands for Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, ran with. They realized that a distributed computer network could handle data broken into small packets of information that had labels attached for finding their destinations and then for reassembling themselves into the proper order. And it works. The book outlines the Open Systems Interconnection, that's OSI. It's a 7-layer communications model. But I'm going to skip all that because it doesn't add to the understanding of the book's important takeaways. And here's the first and most critical takeaway. The original internet didn't consider the importance of trust. Its developers and users knew and trusted one another. And that was good because it allowed for rapid development and expansion. but it was bad because bad actors could exploit this weakness. No matter, the internet turned big data possibilities into reality. Today we have the internet and its AI-empowered software apps for data collection, integration, storage, and availability, for data analytic decision making, for direct control of physical devices connected to the internet, and for transactions linking the world into one financial products and services economy. Blockchain is cutting into traditional forms of currency as well as streamlining linkages in the auditing trail. But along with the good comes the bad, caused by cyber terrorists who use the onion router, that's abbreviated TOR, to access the hidden internet, that's the deep web, plus the criminal dark web. What's an example of them? Well, how about the internet's Silk Road for illegal traffic? Cybercrime, terrorism, and warfare are no longer on the horizon. They are near our tablets, cell phones, and emails. Some examples: corporate computers held hostage by cyber blackmailers. Cyber terrorism, such as Russia's disrupting the last presidential election, or corporate espionage, stealing patents and secrets. And for warfare, cyber torpedoes that can blow up uranium enrichment centrifuges. The next couple of chapters summarize how policy laws for controlling the internet evolve for data 1.0 and 2.0. The Patriot Act, surveillance, and security came into being as the internet grew, but all this leaped into the public consciousness when 9/11 struck, taking us to data 3.0 and its challenges for privacy and security. The public loves to use the internet. Think of shopping and gaming and communicating. But the individual data we leave behind is a lucrative commodity. Audio and video surveillance is everywhere. Think about webcams and China's elaborate surveillance system. People are unwittingly invading their own privacy by leaving a data trail. And fake news can lead people astray. Cell phones and the IoT, and that's the Internet of Things, turn your handheld devices and household appliances into potential spies. The book turns next to the steps for reconfiguring privacy and security for people, corporations, and governments. Governments should be protectors of people's data, but there are temptations for governments to exploit the data. Think about profiling and tracking so-called bad people, or tracking suspected COVID-19 carriers. There are a lot of ethical issues here. What's needed is an international agreement on surveillance protocols for data access, collection, and retention, as well as for inspection, dissemination, and action. The Department of Homeland Security, that's DHS, and the National Security Agency, that's NSA, plus partner agencies are working on this unilaterally, as well as with other international agencies. The Supreme Court and international organizations are involved. No wonder concordance and progress on solutions is so slow. But for the time being, What can private citizens do to protect themselves? Here are steps the book recommends. First, be mindful of what you transmit and where you connect. Remember to practice cyber hygiene. Avoid simplistic passwords. Change them frequently, and never trust requests that come via email. Buy the best cybersecurity software, and maybe hire a company you trust to manage your security. And finally, don't be fooled by people who contact you. Use common sense and disconnect as soon as you realize there's a bad actor at the other end of the connection. Here are the big issues for which policies need to be finalized. What security guarantees should network service providers make? What can be done about fake news? What are the limits on what service providers can do with digital exhaust, which is a clever label for the residue of the data trail we unwittingly leave behind? How can what we consent to be made easier to understand? Who wants to wade through 20 pages of small print that is described in legalese and computerese? And what are the limits on data use for employment, for health, for politics, for law enforcement? Lots and lots of ethical issues. And unless we go off the grid, we are all potential targets. Cybersecurity extends beyond national borders because the internet is global. According to the author, there have been no official military operations or casualties yet, but unofficially there have been both. The international community must establish viable definitions for cyber warfare and how to combat it. To date, the emphasis has been on deterrence that can moderate responses to attackers. But deterrence is more difficult because of the attribution challenge. Who attacked us? Hackers and malicious software apps might not carry a national flag. How to build an active defense is problematic. Criminals and privateers muddy the cyberspace waters in this borderless cyber battlefield. The book concludes by offering 5 cybersecurity recommendations. 1. Loosen the restrictions on what governments can collect and tighten the standards for inspecting and analyzing what the governments are doing. 2. Develop a spectrum of defensive measures that include corporate and government participants. 3. Have international standards to keep the internet a worldwide web instead of a collection of fragmented, nationally controlled intranets. 4. Control the use of what private parties can do with an individual's data. 5. Establish international rules of law that limit the ability of corporations to coerce individuals surrendering control of their data. And the author ends with this wish. We citizens need to control our own data. And perhaps the best way for doing this is to look at the sea of data we are swimming in as a public good that has tremendous value if there are rules preventing overreach and disruption. So we must develop rules that prevent powerful institutions and bad actors from using the internet data to damage us rather than to enhance our autonomy. very powerful and incisive conclusions. And since I've already given examples of how big data affects all our environments, we should all want to see our government and the world community make cybersecurity better. And as the Ministry of the Future points out, you might want to think about America's versus China's solutions. That is, the growing debate between democratic and authoritarian approaches. And I would like to mention a two-part Hulu series for everyone to watch. It is The Hot Zone, which contains a dramatization of the actual Ebola viral pandemic, and it shows how difficult it was to fight because the big data tools weren't available when Ebola came after people. The second part covers the anthrax terrorist attack on D.C. soon after 9/11. I watched both series. You might find them as riveting and sobering as I did. And I'll leave that for you to decide. Well, that does it for this podcast. So I thank you for listening, and we'll say bye-bye until the next time.